May 18, 2006. Vitor Negrete is standing on the summit of Everest. No oxygen, no radio, no partner. There's an icicle hanging from his nose, and the words he speaks to the camera will send a shiver down your spine. He knows the stats. 80% of all deaths happen on the way down. And he's about to prove them right. But how did a scientist from Campinas, who got his start in a university climbing club, end up all alone at 9,000 meters during a season that would claim 11 lives on Everest? To understand that, we have to go back 18 years. The year is 1988. At the University of Campinas, two students meet. 18 years later, they'll both be on Everest. Only one will come home. Vitor Negrete grew up in Campinas, an only child. He gets into Unicamp to study food engineering. And this isn't just some average school. It's one of the top universities in Brazil. It's a place that produces scientists, not daredevils. But this is where it all began. During his first year, Negrete meets Rodrigo Raineri. Together with their classmates, Thomas Pop, Rosita Belinki, and Flavio, nicknamed Bam Bam, they form a group called Gaia. Officially, it's a club for caving, hiking, and rock climbing. Unofficially, it's a crew of students who take off every weekend for the Vale do Ribeira to climb rocks and explore caves. Later, this group would grow into GEEU, Unicamp's official mountaineering club. But for now, they're just friends with ropes and carabiners. Raineri would later say, "We complemented each other. He was the technical one. Negrete was the powerhouse." This partnership would last for 2 decades, and when it finally broke, the consequences would be irreversible. But Negrete wasn't just some guy who climbed rocks. At the same time, he was working at NEPA, a food research center at Unicamp. He was helping the Quilombola communities in the Vale do Ribeira develop banana-based products they could sell at market. This work would later be publicly recognized by President Lula himself. Negrete was a food engineer with a graduate degree and a social mission. For him, mountaineering was still just a hobby, but that was about to change. But before Negrete would take on the mountains, he set his sights on the jungle, on a bicycle. The year is 1990. At 23 years old, he and his friends, Osvaldo Stella Martins and Igor Walter Alexandre, decide to cycle the Trans-Amazonian Highway. On paper, it sounds like a road. In reality, the Trans-Amazonian is 2,500 kilometers of mud, rough terrain, and rainforest, where the pavement ends long before the adventure begins. Each of them is carrying 40 kilograms of gear on his bike. They ride through the lands of indigenous communities, past gold mining camps and military outposts. These 3 are covering on 2 wheels, what most people can only reach by boat or helicopter. Near the Xingu River, Osvaldo comes down with malaria. He's shaking with fever in the middle of the jungle, days away from the nearest hospital. The expedition pushes on. Then, in the town of La Brea, all 3 of them are detained by the police. They look suspicious. 3 young guys on bikes with huge packs in the middle of the Amazon. They're mistaken for smugglers. What saves them are their university documents from Unicamp. The police read the papers and let the students go. In 1994, this insane journey earns them a Brazilian Guinness World Record. But Negrete doesn't stop. His next cycling expedition takes him to the other end of the continent, from Porto Alegre in southern Brazil, all the way to Ushuaia in Tierra del Fuego, the southernmost point of South America. The Amazon taught him the most important lesson of all, how to make decisions in complete isolation, with no doctors, no police, and no contact with the outside world. It's a skill that would come in handy later. But in a very different place, and at a much, much higher altitude. After the jungle in Tierra del Fuego, Negrete returns to where it all began, the rocks. But now, the familiar rock faces of the Vale do Ribeira feel like a warm-up. So, he sets his sights on the Andes, his first serious high-altitude test, Bolivia. Huayna Potosi, 6,088 meters. He summits it twice, once as a guide, the second time, solo. Then comes the technical Asa Esquerda route on Condoriri, 5,500 meters of ice walls. Then Cabeza del Condor. Illimani, at 6,490 meters, the highest peak near La Paz. Negrete treats the Bolivian mountains like a training ground, ticking them off one by one, racking up high-altitude experience the way a pilot racks up flight hours. But his true love becomes Aconcagua. At 6,962 meters, it's the highest point in the Americas. He climbs it so many times, by so many different routes, that no other Brazilian can even come close. The normal route from the northwest, countless times. The Polish glacier, he does it solo. No rope, no protection. Just a man and his ice axe on a wall of steep ice. In 2001, he competes in EMA, Brazil's toughest adventure race, held in the state of Pará. It's a multi-day marathon through jungles, rivers, and mountains. Among his teammates, he earns the nickname Rambo for his raw physical power and his ability to just keep going when everyone else is ready to quit. But here's the thing. Aconcagua is no longer a challenge. Negrete knows that mountain like the back of his hand. He needs something bigger, something no Brazilian has ever done before, and that wall exists, right there on Aconcagua, just on the other side. The south face of Aconcagua, 3,000 meters of vertical ice and rock, one of the 5 most difficult mountain faces on the planet. Most climbers avoid it, taking the standard routes from the northwest. No Brazilian team had ever completed a full ascent of this face. In February of 2001, Negrete and Ranieri arrive at the base of the south face for a reconnaissance mission. They stand at the bottom, craning their necks, memorizing every crack, every ice cornice, every potential line. This isn't an assault, it's reconnaissance. They go home with a clear plan. December 12th, 2001. The 2 of them leave Campinas. By December 27th, they've set up base camp at Plaza Francia, right at the foot of the wall. Their style is alpine. No porters, no siege tactics. Just a 2-man team with whatever they can carry in their packs. The ascent takes about 7 days, and every single one of them is spent working their way up a face that could unleash an avalanche at any moment. On the route, they find something they weren't looking for. The bodies of 3 Brazilian climbers who died here in an avalanche 4 years earlier, in 1998. The mountain preserves its victims in the cold. Negrete and Ranieri pass by, knowing that the only thing separating them from those men is luck and the weather. They reach the summit, the first Brazilian pair to ever conquer the south face of Aconcagua. After this climb, their names appear on a completely different list. They're no longer just good climbers from a university club. They are now the elite of Brazilian high-altitude mountaineering. But for Negrete, this is still just the warm-up. In the summer, Aconcagua is crowded with commercial expeditions and lines on the route. In winter, it's a completely different beast, where temperatures drop to -30, and hurricane-force winds can blow tents away with people still inside them. By August of 2004, only about 20 people in history had ever summited Aconcagua in winter, and not a single one of them was Brazilian. On August 7, 2004, Negrete, Ranieri, Antonio Carlos Soares, and Roman Romancini plant 4 Brazilian flags on the summit, right in the middle of a blizzard. They had waited for a weather window for weeks, stuck in their tents, counting the days, because in winter, those windows open for hours, not days. After the descent, Isto magazine interviews Negrete, and he offers a metaphor that explains his entire approach to the mountains. A mountain is like a spring of water guarded by tigers. To drink and get home in one piece, you have to wait for them to fall asleep. Sometimes the tigers roar, but if you catch the moment they're distracted, you walk away unharmed. This isn't bravado or poetry. It's an operational manual. That same year, he takes 3rd place at the Callaway Adventure Camp, earning a spot at the Adventure Racing World Championship in New Zealand. Scientist, racer, high-altitude mountaineer, Negrete lives as if there are 36 hours in a day. But after the winter ascent of Aconcagua, he realizes there are no more challenges for him in the Andes. There's only one mountain left that's higher than all the others, and only one way to climb it that he considers truly honest, without bottled oxygen. Negrete begins to study Everest long before he ever sets foot on its slopes. In 2003, he flies to Nepal for a reconnaissance trek to base camp. He climbs Kaila Pathar, 5,600 meters, and Gokyo Ri, which offers a full view of Everest from its base to its summit. He isn't trying to climb it yet. He's observing, memorizing the terrain, assessing the routes and the weather. It's the exact same approach he took 2 years earlier, standing at the foot of Aconcagua's south face before he climbed it. It's during this time that he formulates his core argument, one he would repeat in every interview. Using bottled oxygen reduces the perceived altitude by about 2,000 meters. What that means is that climbing Everest with an oxygen mask is, physiologically, almost the same as climbing Aconcagua, and he'd already been up Aconcagua so many times he'd lost count. Climbing Everest on bottled oxygen would be like going back to a place he'd already mastered. The only real challenge was to go without it. At the same time, he starts building a media platform. He becomes a columnist for WebVenture, Brazil's leading portal for extreme sports. He produces a 40-minute documentary, Aconcagua, which is screened at the 5th International Mountain Film Exhibition in 2005. Negrete understands that a serious expedition needs sponsors, and sponsors need an audience. Around this time, he marries a sociologist, Marina Soler Jorge, just 3 months after they meet. Soon after, their son, Leon, is born. He makes decisions quickly, whether it's choosing a route up a rock face or the person he wants to spend his life with. So now he has a family, a media platform, and a clear plan. And it's all aimed at one single point: the summit of Everest on pure physiology without any artificial support. In 2005, the plan finally becomes an expedition. It's called Tryon Expedition Everest Sem Oxygenio, and the name says it all: Everest with no oxygen. The expedition is organized by a Nepalese company, Asian Trekking. The route? Up through Tibet, along the North Face and the North Ridge. Negrete and Raineri fly to the Himalayas, and the TV network Rede Globo sends a reporter, Clayton Conservani, to join them. For the first time ever, a Brazilian expedition to Everest has a national television camera following their every move. But the mountain had other plans. The conditions on the route turn out to be so severe that from Camp 3, at an altitude of 8,300 meters, Negrete is forced to put on an oxygen mask, the very same oxygen tank he'd publicly called a crutch, something that turns Everest into Aconcagua. On June 2, 2005, he stands on the summit, the fourth Brazilian in history to reach the highest point on the planet. But Raineri doesn't make it. He turns back just about 50 meters from the goal, 50 meters, a distance you'd walk in a minute back in the city. But at nearly 9,000 meters, it can cost you your life. Raineri makes the decision to turn around, and that decision saves his life, at least this time. Brazil celebrates, Rede Globo airs the story, the sponsors are happy. But for Negrete himself, this summit felt like passing an exam with a cheat sheet. He technically passed, but he knows he didn't achieve what he came here for. The main goal was left unfinished, and he knows for sure that he will be back, this time without the bottle. Less than a year later, Negrete returns to the same mountain, on the same route, but under completely different circumstances. The project is called Brazil no Topo, Brazil on top, and the goal is crystal clear: summit Everest with no bottled oxygen. The operator is once again Asian Trekking, the same Nepalese company. Only this time, the package is even more budget-friendly. Minimal support above base camp. 2 Sherpas, Ang Dawa and Chumbi, and no one else. Sponsorship money has dwindled, and Rede Globo isn't sending a reporter this time. While in 2005 all of Brazil was watching Negrete on national television, now he is almost entirely alone with the mountain and his blog. The Asian Trekking Group consists of about 13 climbers. Among them are a British man named David Sharp, who is attempting Everest solo on a minimal budget, and a Malaysian climber, Ravi Chandran. Both of these names will soon become part of one of the darkest chapters in Everest's history, because the spring of 2006 would become the deadliest season since the infamous disaster of 1996. Over a few weeks, at least 11 people will die on the mountain. On the north side alone, Sharp, the Swedish skier Thomas Olsson, the Frenchman Jacques-Hugues Letrange, the German Thomas Weber, and the Russian climber Igor Plushkin. This season, Everest is claiming lives one after another. On April 25th, Negrete and Raineri reach Camp 1 on the North Col at 7,100 meters. They are met with relentless snowfalls, and it becomes clear that this expedition will be nothing like the last one. On May 13th, the partnership that had lasted for 18 years, since their very first day at Unicamp, through caves, the Andes, the South Face, and winter blizzards, is broken. Rainieri has frostbite on his feet, and a second summit attempt is impossible for him. They both descend to advanced base camp, and Negrete finds himself facing a choice he's never had before: give up or go on alone. He chooses to go. On May 15th, he begins his solo push from ABC. And on May 16th, when he reaches Camp 2 at 7,600 meters, he's hit with 3 devastating blows, one after another. The first is the news about David Sharp, the British climber from their Asian trekking group. Sharp was found freezing to death near a rock shelter at 8,500 meters. An estimated 40 climbers passed him by, and no one could or would help. Sharp did not survive. The second blow? The Malaysian climber, Ravi Chandran, has severe frostbite and needs to be evacuated immediately. And the third? Someone has looted the Brazilian expedition's food supply at Camp 2. The tent and provisions are stolen, leaving Negrete stranded at high altitude with no food and no shelter. He gets on the radio with base camp and reports. All these events have shaken me deeply. I even thought about giving up, but Ravi asked me to reach the summit for him. Other climbers share their food and gear with him, and Negrete continues his ascent. The man who always climbed rope to Rainieri is now heading up alone, on a mountain that has already claimed several lives in recent days, with someone else's supplies instead of his own. On May 17th, Negrete reaches Camp 3 on the northeast ridge, 8,300 meters. This is the final stop before the summit, and from here, he must launch his final push. Sherpa Ang Dawa is also here, the only other person nearby. Negrete pulls out his satellite phone and calls Rainieri at base camp. The battery is almost dead, and he knows this will be their last conversation. He says, "I'm going tonight. No oxygen, no Sherpa, and no sat phone. The battery's almost shot. I'm going completely alone. I promise to be careful." Rainieri listens to these words, and then the connection cuts out. The phone would never turn on again. Before setting out, Negrete records a video diary. In the footage, he looks exhausted but calm. He mentions only minor problems, a cold and an unpleasant feeling in my lungs. To someone in a city, this sounds like nothing, just a little cold. But at 8,300 meters, without oxygen, any discomfort in the lungs is a massive red flag. At this altitude, the air contains only a third of the oxygen found at sea level, and the lungs are working at their absolute limit. A cold and chest discomfort could be the onset of high-altitude pulmonary edema, a condition where fluid fills the lungs, and a person essentially begins to drown on dry land. Negrete either doesn't know this or doesn't want to. His only remaining link is a handheld radio to Ang Dawa with a very limited range. That night, he leaves the tent for his summit push, alone, in the dark, running on pure physiology, with a radio that can only reach Ang Dawa's tent. On May 18th, sometime between noon and 1 in the afternoon, Negrete steps onto the summit of Mount Everest, 8,849 meters. He had been climbing all night and all morning, about 12 hours up the northeast ridge, alone, without oxygen, in a silence broken only by his own breathing and the wind. He becomes the first Brazilian to climb the world's highest peak without bottled oxygen. He is about the 120th person in the world to do so. The very thing he returned for a year after his first expedition, what he considered the only honest way to climb Everest. It's done. On the summit, he takes out his camera and records a video. An icicle hangs from his nose, an image that would soon be broadcast on every TV channel in Brazil. He dedicates the climb to Rainieri, to Marina, and to his family. And then he says something into the camera that's impossible to hear without a chill, knowing what happens next. "I am very, very tired. Over 80% of accidents happen on the descent." And he adds, "It's wise to get out of here quickly." On his way up, he had seen the bodies of those who didn't make it back this season. Everest doesn't hide its victims. They lie along the trail, frozen into the snow and ice, like warnings to those who follow. Negrete passed them on the ascent, and now he must pass them again on the way down. The goal he had been working toward for 18 years has been achieved. Now for the second half, getting back down alive. The descent begins in the afternoon, and almost immediately something goes wrong. Negrete grows weaker with every step down, and his pace, already slow after 12 hours of climbing without oxygen, drops to a crawl. Somewhere around 8,500 meters, he realizes he's not going to make it on his own and presses the button on his radio, the only connection he has left. Aconcagua gets the call in Camp 3 and sets out to meet him. The Sherpa climbs 200 meters up the ridge and finds Negrete in a state that leaves no room for doubt. He's disoriented, his hands are bare, he's complaining of severe chest pain, and he's speaking Portuguese. Aconcagua doesn't understand a word. They have no common language, only gestures and intonation. The Sherpa radios for backup. The second Sherpa, Pachumbi, who is much further down at advanced base camp. Around midnight, the two Sherpas manage to drag Negrete into the tent at Camp 3. They give him warm juice and put an oxygen mask on him, the very bottled oxygen he had refused on principle on his way to the summit. But even with oxygen and warmth, his body continues to fail. After spending more than a day above 8,000 meters without artificial support, his body has exhausted all its reserves. On May 19th, at around 2 in the morning, Nepal time, Vitor Negrete stops breathing in his tent at 8,300 meters. He was 38 years old. The cause of death: a combination of extreme exhaustion, hypothermia, and oxygen starvation, leading to pulmonary edema, cerebral edema, or both. When the news reaches base camp, it raises a question asked on Everest more often than anyone would like: what to do with the body? On the Tibetan side of the mountain, helicopter evacuations are forbidden by local regulations. The insurance policy arranged through Asian Trekking technically covers repatriation, but that would mean several people would have to climb to 8,300 meters, package the body, and carry it down the ridge, risking their own lives. Negrete's family makes a decision. His body will remain on the mountain. They don't want anyone else to die trying to bring him down. The Sherpas build a simple stone cairn over his body, right there in Camp 3. A cairn at an altitude most people will never reach. Rainery, his feet still frostbitten, makes the climb up to that spot for a final farewell ceremony. He stands beside the pile of rocks that now covers the man with whom he had shared a rope since their first year of university. A partner who had become closer than a brother. Negrete had told his wife that if the mountain ever took him, he wanted his body to be left there. He saw the body as just a temporary vessel and didn't attach much importance to it. But he would always add that something else truly worried him. He was an only child, and his death would cause his parents a kind of suffering they might never recover from. The China-Tibet Mountaineering Association officially confirmed his death. As far as public records show, no formal investigation into the causes was ever launched, not by China nor by Brazil. Negrete's body remains at Camp 3, beneath stones piled by Sherpas. A few days after his death, the TV Globo program, Fantástico, aired his final video diaries. Millions of Brazilians saw the footage from the summit, a tired face with an icicle on his nose, and his words about how 80% of all accidents happen on the descent. The image became iconic, splashed across the covers of dozens of publications. O Globo, Folha de São Paulo, and Isto É magazine all ran with the headline, "Brazil's Greatest Adventurer." But Negrete's story became intertwined with another, even bigger one. He was the one who had relayed the news from Camp 2 that David Sharp was dying on the route, while dozens of other climbers were passing him by. This news sparked a global debate about the ethics of high-altitude mountaineering. Is it okay to leave someone to die on a mountain? Do you have the right to just walk past? The deaths of Sharp and Negrete became two sides of the same coin in the deadly season of 2006. Within the Brazilian climbing community, its own controversy erupted. The blog Cara Louca published a scathing critique. Negrete himself had recorded on video that he felt discomfort in his lungs, dismissed it as minor, and pushed on for the summit. Critics called it a classic case of summit fever, a state where the drive to reach the goal overrides all common sense. Others argued back, climbing without supplemental oxygen is a conscious choice and a legitimate philosophy, not just recklessness. In November of 2006, a municipal law in Campinas renamed the Torre do Castelo Tower in his honor. The climbing gym at Unicamp was also named after him. In 2007, a tribute documentary, Vitor Negrete, In Search of My Dreams, was released. His wife, Marina, published a book in 2008, Espírito Livre, based on her husband's audio recordings. And Reinery, along with journalist Diogo Schelp, wrote a memoir titled No Teto do Mundo, published in 2011, which detailed his partner's final days. On July 4, 2024, 18 years after Negrete's death, his partner Rodrigo Raineri was killed in a paragliding accident near K2 in Pakistan. The man who had turned back just 50 meters from the summit of Everest in 2005, who had dragged himself down the ridge on frostbitten feet in 2006, who had climbed to that stone cairn to say goodbye to his friend, he himself was now gone, on the other side of the Himalayas, at the foot of the world's second highest mountain. Raineri's body was brought back to Campinas. The memorial service was held in the Unicamp gym, the very one that houses the Vitor Negrete climbing wall. The Brazilian press described it as a mutual tribute, one honoring the other, even in death. The partnership that began back in 1988 on the university cliffs of Val do Ribeira came full circle here, in this gym 36 years later. Raineri's death brought Negrete's story back into the media spotlight. In March of 2025, the news portal Metropoles published a major profile featuring an interview with his grown son, Leon. Now in his 20s, he said something that perhaps describes both men best. Their goal was to do what was possible in order to discover the impossible. Vitor Negrete's body still lies at Camp 3 on the north side of Everest, beneath the stones placed by Sherpas back in May of 2006. At an altitude of 8,300 meters, where the temperature never rises above freezing and the air is so thin a normal person wouldn't last more than a few hours. He wanted to reach the summit on its own terms, and he did. The mountain just wouldn't let him come down.